The first codexes are getting Warhammer 40k off to a bang in 2022. Let's talk about what's coming for the Custodes and the Cultists. Hello and welcome back to Warspec Tactics, where today we're just talking about the release of the Custodes and the Genestealer Cult codexes, now confirmed to be going on pre-order this weekend. I thought in this video we'd just take a look at what's actually being released for them and what isn't being released, and then do a brief recap of all the things that we know about these codexes so far and what to expect. So it seems that this is the entirety of the release for the Custodes and the Genestealer Cults, literally just the codex, dice and data cards at this point. A standard codex should cost £30, €37, 50 or $50 and there is a limited edition collector's one that has basically the same artwork on it. So far we're not getting anything like the individual releases for the Adeptus Saboteur or the Blade Champion, and we don't have any combat patrol sets for either army yet. I think both of those will be things that both factions are eager to get. The models are pretty handy to be bought individually, particularly if you didn't want it packaged alongside all the other models in the Shadow Throne box. I strongly suspect that the Blade Champion and the Saboteur will be following the codex fairly shortly. I think it usually tends to be within a week to a month after the codex release. I guess we'll have to wait and see with the combat patrol boxes. Some of the armies have had them really quite quickly after their codex dropped, other ones have had to wait a significant amount of time to receive them. It does seem that Games Workshop are planning on releasing a combat patrol box alongside each of their factions. They include them as routine in artwork for the codex, but there has been quite a gap between certain codexes releasing and them actually receiving their start collecting kits. For example, the Grey Knight and the Thousand Suns ones, both of those have had their contents fully revealed by the panel in the codex, but they haven't actually materialised as something that you can actually buy yet. I'm guessing that they will be coming out at some point, but Games Workshop seems to be taking their sweet time about them. In any case, Custodes are normally a fairly cheap army to collect in terms of pounds for the amount of points that you put on the table, so any discount on top of that will just be super good. Whereas the Genestealer Cults do already have a fairly decent start collecting box, I believe that's the one with the Ridge Runner in it. That one seems fine to me for the moment. Next up, I thought we'd just do a quick review of the rules that we know so far for the Custodes, and then go on to the Genestealer Cults. We've got a very little bit of new information today with a look at the contents page for the book, largely fairly expected stuff here, the lore for the army and the miniature showcases, then 6 of the new shield hosts which were previously present in the expansion book. Now they list the Emperor's Chosen alongside the rest of them, the one that sounds like you can fall back on with any shield company to represent them fighting as a whole. The Captain Commander traits still appear to be present. I'm going to guess that they're going to be the Custodes paid for in points upgrade, so you pay regular points for them rather than command points. The relic section looks interesting as well. It's split into the Relics of Terror and the Relics of the Vigil. I'd imagine that the Relics of the Vigil will represent the Sisters of Silence relics, seeing as they are part of the codex now and they do have their own HQ choice. There's then the big section on Crusade rules, and a fair few datasheets new to the codex. Valerian and Alea are now separate into 2 separate datasheets, rather than the slightly weird combined one that they had. There's the new Blade Champion, the Knight Centura, the Sisters' new HQ choice, the 3 units of the Sisters of Silence which weren't actually in the previous codex, and then the Anathema Psychana Rhino. I suspect that one will be fairly basic issue, to get those sisters from A to B. Going on to a quick roundup of the rest of the rules that we know for the Custodes. The new miniature for the codex is the Blade Champion, an 110 point HQ choice with 6 attacks. He's a lot more of a general purpose brawler than a leader, and attacks with his 3 different fighting styles. They're listed here, but one's good against monsters, one doubles his attacks, and one re-rolls wound rolls against characters. In general, he looks like he's going to be a cheap and cheerful choice that's going to have a really good chance of doing more damage to the enemy than the points cost that he has. I guess he still might be able to take some sort of command-related warlord traits, but it's going to be interesting weighing him up against the regular shield captains, who I'm sure will still be very fighty and also allow your troops to fight a bit better. For special rules, he comes with quite a lot of the standard champion-related ones, +1 save in melee, a 6-inch heroic intervention and fighting first, a nice melee defense in that hit rolls against him of 1 to 3 will always fail. That does make him quite good at taking out things like HQs and things, as they won't be able to hit him quite as well. And then he can help inspire the brothers into combat with a +1 to their charge rolls. He does only have a 3+ save though, not unheard of from the Custodes within their Forge World ranks, but I do find it kind of weird that one of their fightiest characters has one of the worst saves in the codex. Still though, it looks like a lot of fun to use, so I'm going to remain a bit reserved as to whether or not he's going to be a go-to choice or not. Otherwise, we've seen a fair few previews of datasheets from within the codex. These ones came out from the rules in the Shadow Throne box. The Alaris Custodian Terminators look a bit more threatening than they were. Their unit size is capped at 6 now, though if it follows the same datasheet as the Shadow Throne rules, we might be able to take them in units of 1. They got a few nice boosts, including the slightly mad army-wide leadership 11 that the Custodes got. They won't be running away very easily whatsoever. Both of their melee weapons are now flat damage 2 rather than D3. The Guardian Spear got a boost to +1 strength, and they got quite a nice boost to their ballistas grenade launchers with the extra range and a bit more strength. Otherwise, the Custodes characters both seem a little bit more fighty. The Alara's shield captain got +1 wound and attack. The Vexilla got +1 wound, and now the Vexilla Defensor is really quite interesting. It gives you an aura of light cover nearby to him, and that could be really powerful indeed in combination with the decent Custodes saves. I wouldn't like to shift a unit of Storm Shield Custodians at range with this banner nearby. For the Sisters of Silence, there's been a bit of a shake-up with prosecutors being troops now. It's going to be interesting to see if they're restricted in any way, otherwise the Custodes can get some very cheap troop slots if they don't want to have maximum golden boys. It could maybe free up some points for more things like Dreadnoughts or Terminators if you wanted. The Prosecutors and Vigilators remain very similar, but the Witch Seekers also got an interesting change, becoming fast attack. The Flamers are AP -1 now, and they have a similar pre-game move to the Sisters of Battle Dominions, allowing them to have a pre-game move of 6 inches, and that can convey to a Rhino as well. I'm still not 100% sure if they're going to be excellent damage dealers though, even with AP -1 on their guns. One of the biggest changes to the Codex is this new Martial Qatar special rule, which is one of the more complicated army-wide special rule mechanics. I believe it's going to be the one that the Custodes get if their entire army is Custodes and they don't include allies. At the start of the game, after you've seen your opponent's army, you nominate 3 different Qatars to be your first, second and third ones. You have to progress from one to the next, and then you can use up to 2 stances on each one. So say turn 1 you could have your primary Qatar stance 2, then your primary Qatar stance 1, then go on to your secondary Qatar and take stance 2 from that, and then go straight on to your tertiary one and start with stance 1 of that. A little bit convoluted, but quite flexible, and quite nice that you can tailor them to your opponent. Here are a couple of ones that have been previewed already. The Callistus one I quite like for being able to advance and still shoot normally. That could allow Dreadnoughts to get really quickly up the board while still maintaining firepower. And the Decateri one's interesting against hordes. It gives you an extra attack, though your attacks become damage 1 each. It could also really mess with combat as well, make your enemies only pile in 1 inches, so they might not be able to get into the fight. That could make it really threatening for your own small elite units, targeting enemy units that are in any way large. The example for a tertiary one that they've given is the Captaris Qatar. This one perhaps seems okay. It can stop your enemy having rerolls in melee, and there's one for giving the enemy a chance to be unable to fall back. I think the second one could potentially be more powerful. You might be able to attack one enemy unit, kill it, and then consolidate into another, and hopefully keep that one in combat. Still though, maybe a little bit more niche than some of them. If your opponent's playing a really good melee army, then it could be counterproductive. For the Sisters of Silence as well, we have this Knight Centura HQ, which we already have the profile for. It's made from the standard kit, so we don't have a new model for it, but it looks like this Knight Centura is going to have a really similar profile to the Canoness from the Sisters of Battle. As a basic command character, she gives rerolls of wound rolls of 1 to nearby Sisters of Silence. I'm sure she'll be giving enemy psychers a headache when they try and cast nearby, and it appears that she's armed with an Executioner Greatblade. Could be pretty interesting as another cheap little HQ choice for the Custodes, if you don't want to commit to another really massive fighty character and you just need to fill a detachment. Finally, the last really big change that we know about for the Custodes are the Shield Host rules. Previously just a Stratagem, Relic and a Warlord trait, but now they're getting full on chapter tactics, each of which gives 2 benefits. The new one is called the Emperor's Chosen, and from what they said on Warhammer Community, it sounds like this is going to be a sort of an overarching Shield Host, perhaps more representing the Custodes fighting together as a whole rather than individual shield companies on given missions. Their benefit gives you either reroll 1 hit or 1 wound roll when attacking, a small but useful damage buff, and also a mighty 4+ feel no pain against mortal wounds, though I am going to guess that the Custodes are likely to have a feel no pain type save against mortal wounds baked into them. They might well be upgraded to something like a 5+ on their Aegis of the Emperor rule. Otherwise, we've just got a couple of bits from the Aquilon Shield, the Dread Host and the Solar Watch. The Aquilon Shield get heroically intervene on all of their units like characters, really nice for holding those objectives, and they get to ignore AP -1. The second bit's helpful, but kind of situational, going to be useful against some but not against others. Otherwise, they've got a stratagem to protect characters even more. And there's a couple of bits from the Solar Watch. They've got a Warlord trait for allowing one unit to advance and charge, really quite big for threat ranges that, and a Relic Guardian Spear. It's going to be interesting to weigh these up once we have their rules in full. and see which ones are looking the most threatening. Moving on to the Genestealers now, and we perhaps haven't had quite as many previews for them, though we have seen a lot of their datasheets again from their Shadow Throne set. Their new model is of course this Reductus Saboteur, an 80 points or Power 4 Elite's Choice character, a fairly standard infantry profile, though getting a nice ballistic skill 2+ to set off explosives. She can fire a remote explosives attack, which basically counts as a shooting attack, 24 inches with 2d6 strength 8 AP-3 shots that go up to a big damage 3 against vehicles. She's also got a demo charge for up close work, d6 shots AP-3 and damage 2, that's going to be fun to throw around with the other units that get them. And she's got a very small action that she can use to sacrifice her movement phase. She sets up a remote explosive marker on the battlefield, and then the next time your opponent tries to move there, they have a good chance of taking a fair few mortal wounds. Interestingly, she doesn't get the crossfire special rule, so that kind of implies that it's just going to be the main core Genestealer Cult units that get that, and the really powerful shooting buffs that it brings. Perhaps making great use of this will be the Neophytes. Their main stats are unchanged from before, and you can still take squads of up to 20. And the main interesting things that they've had change are things like their grenades, mining weapons, and other gear. Blasting charges are now an interesting strength 5 AP-1 grenade with only D3 shots. They'll generally be better than frag grenades against things that are toughness 4. The seismic cannon, which was often overlooked, has got a decent buff to both profiles. It's a pretty good all-round infantry killer now. The Weber has a chance to roll off against enemy strength for mortal wounds. The shotgun's gone up to strength 4, so it's going to be a really interesting choice out of Cult Ambush now, if you do want these guys just to drop in and deal a lot of range damage. And it does seem that the power pick has maybe got a small nerf. It no longer does D3 damage, so isn't quite as effective against elite infantry. Perhaps the single coolest change for the Neophytes though is their Cult Icon. It allows them to regenerate D6 models every command phase, so it's going to really punish your opponent if they do manage to damage the squad but don't entirely wipe it out. You can often do some pretty gamey shenanigans with returning models to the squad. You might be able to use those extra models to snag objectives and things. Otherwise, in other previews from the Shadow Throne box, the mages can now finally cast 2 powers. Previously they were only limited to 1, though I must admit that the Genestealer Cult powers were really quite strong as a result, and I think his Spiritual Leader special rule is actually going to be quite meaningful. It gives a 5+ shrug off against psychic mortal wounds to your friendly units within 6 inches. Not too bad with the amount of Grey Knights out and about. The Primus has also been decently dialed up. He's actually got a somewhat good melee profile now. Previously he was only strength 4 and damage 1. Being strength 5 and damage 2 means at least he should be able to threaten a few Space Marines. I'd argue that his buffs are also more helpful too. He has a Captain type aura for reroll 1s for core units within 6, and he can further command 1 other core unit within 9 inches to reroll 1s to wound as well. That's going to be a significant amount of extra damage for one cultist unit, basically the equivalent of a captain and lieutenant for that unit in 1. The Patriarch I think might have had slightly more mixed blessings. It looks like he's going to be a decent amount more tough, with an extra wound and a 4+ invul save that's gone up from 5+, but basically his ignore morale bubble has just become ignore combat patrician modifiers. He appears to have lost his brood telepathy combat buff to nearby Genestealers, so unless that manifests it on the actual Genestealer datasheet, then that's gone too. He's -1 strength now, so only strength 5, but will still be wounding most things most of the time with that reroll to wound, though I guess at least he does cast 2 psychic powers now, so it's going to be far more flexible as a buffing piece there. I think I'm kind of 50-50 as to whether or not he's going to be more or less useful. Being an HQ choice, I think it might more depend on what he can actually pick up in terms of war gear, what relics and warlord traits he can bear into battle that might well decide whether or not he's really worth using. It's hard to imagine a fast and fighty character with 2 psychic spells from being completely useless though. Finally, and perhaps the most interesting change for the Genestealer Cults so far, is this crossfire rule. You get to try and catch an enemy unit in a crossfire if you've scored at least 5 hits with a damage 1 weapon, or just 1 hit with a damage characteristic that's got more than 1 on it. Then that means that all your other crossfire units then get +1 to hit against that, which is a pretty enormous buff on an army that's mainly got ballistic skill 4+ shooting. It seems that most characters probably aren't going to get this, at least judging by that Reductus Saboteur's datasheet, but things like the Ridge Runner and the Neophytes certainly will. Secondly, and one really quite fun mechanic, though disturbingly powerful sounding, is the chance for your crossfire units to expose an enemy unit and get an even bigger damage buff. If you can draw a line between 2 crossfire units and it crosses the enemy unit, then that unit becomes exposed. You get a +1 to wound for shooting attacks against them, and your units will also ignore cover against them if their shooting is within 12 inches range. It kind of almost doesn't matter what you're firing against an enemy target. If it's got +1 to hit, wound and ignores cover on it, it's going to hit significantly hard. Even things like mass autoguns sound like they'll chip away a fair few wounds with those kind of buffs going on. Overall, I think that this looks like it's going to make Genestealer Cult into a lot more of a shooty army. I wouldn't be too surprised if a lot of the more powerful builds once the codex has dropped become ranged ones. It also looks like there's a few other special rules around crossfire. You can use it to prevent overwatch, make it fight last in the fight phase, and it looks like their paid for in points upgrade will be called proficient planning things, and you can use one of these to make an enemy unit exposed against one unit's attacks. Seems like that one could easily be worth it, paying 15 points for a +1 to wound out of the Alpha Strike. So anyway, I'm certainly looking forward to seeing more and reviewing these codexes once they do come out in full. It's going to be interesting to see what sort of combos we can put together, both for the Custodes and for the Genestealer Cults. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you would like to see the full review of the books. Finally, if you'd like to help support the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and it's down in the video description below. Making all the videos do take a fair amount of time. If you are enjoying regularly, then any support is enormously appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.